The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune above the sterile examination room at Naval Medical Center Portsmouth as Petty Officer Second Class Riley Trent settled onto the paper-covered table. She had made this journey countless times over her 8 years of service, the annual medical examination as predictable as the sunrise over the Norfolk Harbor. The clipboard in her hands held the same forms she filled out every year, the same questions about medications and allergies that never seemed to change. Riley checked her watch and noted she was exactly on time. Punctuality had become second nature during her years in the Navy, though some habits ran deeper than military training. She straightened the sleeves of her Navy working uniform, the blue and gray camouflage pattern crisp from careful pressing. Her ribbons sat in perfect alignment above her left breast pocket, a modest collection that spoke of steady service rather than heroic deeds. National Defense Service Medal, Navy Good Conduct Medal, and a handful of others that marked time served rather than battles fought. The waiting room had been filled with the usual mix of active duty personnel and dependents, some nervously fidgeting with paperwork, while others stared at their phones with practiced military patience. Riley had observed them all with the quiet attention that had become her default setting over the years. A young seaman fresh from boot camp picked at his sleeve, probably facing his first Navy physical. An older chief petty officer read a worn paperback novel, completely at ease with the routine. A pregnant Navy spouse rubbed her belly while filling out what looked like prenatal forms. I wonder where all of you are watching this from today, Riley thought as she noticed how different people handled the same routine differently. Have any of you ever walked into what you thought would be a completely normal appointment, only to have your entire world shift beneath your feet? Sometimes the most ordinary moments become the most extraordinary, though we never see it coming. Hospital Corpsman Third Class Martinez knocked twice on the door before entering, tablet in hand, and wearing the same professional smile that every medical technician seemed to master during their training. Riley had seen dozens like him over the years, competent and efficient, treating each patient as a series of boxes to check rather than a person with a story. This suited her perfectly. She preferred being just another routine appointment in an endless stream of routine appointments. "Good morning, Petty Officer Trent," Martinez said as he settled into the rolling chair beside the examination table. "I see you are here for your annual physical readiness assessment. How are you feeling today? Ready to get this done and get back to work?" Riley replied with the easy smile she had perfected for such interactions. The logistics office at Naval Station Norfolk stayed busy regardless of whether she was present, but Riley took pride in maintaining efficiency standards that kept supply chains moving smoothly. Martinez nodded and began the familiar ritual of checking vital signs. Blood pressure cuff around her arm, thermometer under her tongue, stethoscope moving across her back as she breathed deeply on command. Each measurement was recorded in his tablet with practiced efficiency. Riley had always been impressed by how quickly corpsmen could work through their checklists, though she supposed they had plenty of practice. Her medical file showed nothing unusual. 8 years of clean physicals, no major injuries, no chronic conditions requiring ongoing treatment. She had been fortunate in that regard, avoiding the wear and tear that seemed to accumulate on so many of her peers. No deployments to austere environments, no exposure to combat stress, no radiation from reactor compartments. Her service record painted the picture of a sailor who had managed to avoid the hazards that came with more adventurous military specialties. "Any changes to medications or supplements since your last visit?" Martinez asked while scrolling through her previous records. "Nothing new," Riley confirmed. "Same multivitamin, same allergy medication during spring pollen season. Any injuries or medical concerns you want to discuss today?" "None that I can think of." The questions continued in their predictable pattern. Family history unchanged, no tobacco use, moderate alcohol consumption, regular exercise routine maintained. Riley answered each inquiry with the same calm directness she brought to every aspect of her military service. No drama, no complications, just steady competence that kept the machinery of military medicine moving forward. Martinez completed his initial screening and made notes in the tablet before standing to retrieve additional equipment from the supply cabinet. Riley noticed how he moved with the same efficient motion she had observed in countless medical personnel over the years. Every action calculated to minimize time while maximizing thoroughness. The Navy had trained them both well in their respective specialties. The examination room itself reflected the institutional uniformity that characterized military medical facilities worldwide. Beige walls decorated with standard health education posters about nutrition and exercise. A sink with motion-activated faucets. A locked cabinet containing medical supplies. A computer workstation with the same interface used throughout the military medical system. Nothing about the space suggested anything unusual would happen here. Riley had grown comfortable with medical examinations during her years of service, though this comfort had not always come naturally. Early in her career, she had experienced the same nervous energy that affected most young sailors facing unfamiliar procedures. Time and repetition had worn away those edges until routine medical care became just another aspect of military life to navigate with professional detachment. "All right," Martinez said as he returned to his chair. "I need to complete the physical examination portion now. Standard procedure, nothing you have not been through before." Riley nodded and waited for him to begin. She had no reason to expect this examination would differ from any of the others that had preceded it. Her service record was clean, her health was good, and her morning schedule included returning to the logistics office to process a shipment of replacement parts that had arrived overnight. This medical appointment was simply one more administrative requirement to complete before getting back to the real work of keeping Navy operations running smoothly. Martinez began the physical examination with the same methodical approach he brought to every patient, starting with a visual inspection as Riley removed her uniform blouse and sat in the standard military-issued tank top. His eyes moved across her shoulders and arms with clinical detachment, noting the absence of visible tattoos or unusual markings that might require documentation. Everything appeared routine until his gaze reached her midsection. The corpsman paused mid-motion, his pen hovering over the tablet as something caught his attention. Along Riley's left side, partially visible beneath the edge of her tank top, ran a series of faint but distinctive marks that did not match any injury patterns he had encountered during his medical training. The scarring appeared deliberate rather than accidental, too precise to be random trauma, but too numerous to be surgical. "I need you to lift your shirt so I can complete the abdominal examination," Martinez said, his tone remaining professionally neutral despite the questions forming in his mind. Riley complied without hesitation, raising the fabric to expose her torso while maintaining the same calm demeanor she had displayed throughout the appointment. She had undergone this examination annually for 8 years, and nothing about Martinez's request seemed unusual. The slight tension in his posture escaped her notice as he leaned closer to examine what he had glimpsed moments earlier. The scarring was far more extensive than Martinez had initially realized. Across Riley's left side and lower back, a constellation of small circular marks created an intricate pattern that spoke of high-velocity impacts rather than the clean lines of surgical procedures. Each scar was roughly the size of a pencil eraser, with the characteristic raised edges that indicated deep tissue damage followed by careful healing. More troubling still was their distribution, clustered in a way that suggested multiple simultaneous impacts rather than isolated incidents. Martinez had seen combat injuries during his deployment to Afghanistan, had treated Marines and sailors who carried the physical evidence of their service in hostile environments. These markings bore uncomfortable similarities to shrapnel wounds he had documented in field hospitals, the kind of trauma that occurred when explosive devices detonated in close proximity to human targets. But Riley's service record indicated no combat deployments, no exposure to hostile fire, no medical treatment for traumatic injuries. "How did you get these scars?" Martinez asked, his clinical curiosity overriding normal examination protocol. Riley's response came without the immediate fluency that had characterized her earlier answers. "Old accident from before I joined the Navy. Nothing significant." The explanation felt insufficient given the evidence before him. Martinez had treated enough accident victims to recognize the difference between civilian trauma and combat-related injuries. These scars showed the hallmarks of military-grade explosive damage, the kind of wounds that resulted from fragmentation devices designed specifically to kill and maim human targets. More concerning was their age, which appeared consistent with Riley's timeline of military service rather than predating her enlistment. "Can you be more specific about the nature of this accident?" Martinez pressed gently. Riley's eyes fixed on a point somewhere above his shoulder, her voice maintaining its steady tone despite the slight delay in her response. Vehicle accident when I was young. Multiple injuries that healed over time. Martinez made notes in his tablet while processing the inconsistency between her explanation and his medical observations. Vehicle accidents typically produce different injury patterns, with impact trauma and road surface abrasions rather than the precise, circular scarring he was documenting. His training had taught him to recognize the signatures of different types of trauma, and these marks told a story that contradicted Riley's account. The corpsman continued his examination with increased attention to detail, discovering additional scarring along Riley's right shoulder blade and upper arm that had been concealed by her tank top. The pattern remained consistent with fragmentation damage, each mark telling part of a larger story about violence and survival that did not align with her official military record. His documentation grew more detailed with each discovery, photographs and measurements that would become part of her permanent medical file. I need to document these thoroughly for your record, Martinez explained as he retrieved a digital camera from the medical equipment cabinet. This is standard procedure for any significant scarring that was not previously recorded. Riley nodded her consent while maintaining the same cooperative attitude she had displayed throughout the examination, though Martinez noticed a subtle shift in her breathing pattern that suggested increased stress. Her responses to his questions had become more measured, each answer carefully constructed rather than spontaneously offered. The easy conversation that had marked the beginning of their appointment had been replaced by a more guarded interaction. The photography process revealed additional details that concerned Martinez further. Under the bright examination lights and magnification of the digital camera, the scarring showed characteristics that were impossible to reconcile with civilian accident trauma. The depth and precision of the wounds, the uniform healing patterns, and the strategic distribution across vital areas suggested exposure to military-grade explosives in a combat environment. Martinez had treated enough veterans to recognize the physical signatures of different conflict zones. He had seen the aftermath of improvised explosive devices, rocket-propelled grenades, and artillery fragments. The scarring on Riley's torso matched documented cases from his deployment experience, the kind of trauma that typically resulted in Purple Heart citations and extensive rehabilitation rather than quiet service in support roles. Have you ever experienced any ongoing pain or complications from these injuries? Martinez asked while completing his photographic documentation. Occasionally some stiffness during cold weather, but nothing that interferes with my duties, Riley replied. Her answer revealed additional information that Martinez found troubling. Combat veterans often downplayed their symptoms, trained to suppress physical discomfort in service of mission requirements. The casual mention of weather-related pain suggested nerve damage or embedded foreign objects that could indicate more serious trauma than her dismissive tone suggested. I am going to need senior medical officer review of these findings, Martinez informed her as he completed his documentation. This is routine for any unusual scarring patterns that require additional evaluation. Riley's expression remained neutral, but Martinez noticed her hands had formed loose fists at her sides, a subtle stress response that contrasted with her outward calm. Her breathing had become slightly more controlled, the kind of deliberate regulation that suggested military training in stress management. These small details added to his growing certainty that Petty Officer Riley Trent carried secrets that extended far beyond the routine medical examination he had expected to conduct. The implications of his discoveries would require careful handling through proper military medical channels. Martinez had encountered classified information before, had learned to recognize when routine procedures uncovered material that exceeded his clearance level. The scarring patterns on Riley's body suggested exposure to combat trauma that contradicted her official service record, raising questions that would need to be addressed by personnel with appropriate authority and security clearance. As Martinez prepared to conclude the examination, he realized that what had begun as a routine annual physical had evolved into something far more complex and potentially significant. Within 20 minutes of completing his documentation, Martinez found himself in the office of Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hawkins, the senior medical officer whose expression had grown increasingly grave as she reviewed the photographs and examination notes on her secure terminal. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her weathered features as she scrolled through the digital evidence with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too much during her 23 years of naval medical service. Riley remained in the examination room, officially waiting for final clearance to complete her physical readiness assessment, though both she and Martinez understood that the routine nature of her appointment had fundamentally shifted. Through the closed door, she could hear the muted sounds of increased activity in the medical facility corridors, footsteps moving with greater urgency than the typical pace of military healthcare bureaucracy. Commander Hawkins enlarged each photograph on her screen, studying the scarring patterns with an intensity that made Martinez increasingly uncomfortable. He had expected her to review his findings and either approve his documentation or request additional examination procedures. Instead, she appeared to be comparing the images against some internal database or reference material that existed beyond his security clearance level. "Corpsman Martinez," Commander Hawkins said without looking away from her screen, "I need you to understand that what happens next falls under operational security protocols. Nothing about this examination gets discussed outside official channels." The gravity in her voice suggested implications far beyond routine medical documentation. Martinez had encountered classified material during his deployment experience, had learned to recognize when standard procedures intersected with sensitive information that required special handling. Commander Hawkins was activating security measures that indicated Riley's scarring patterns had triggered something significant in the military medical intelligence system. "Yes, ma'am," Martinez replied, though his curiosity about the situation had intensified rather than diminished. Commander Hawkins picked up her secure telephone and dialed a number that bypassed the normal base directory system. Martinez could hear only her side of the conversation, but her tone suggested she was speaking with personnel at a significantly higher authority level than typical medical consultations would require. "This is Commander Hawkins at Naval Medical Portsmouth. I have photographic evidence that may match classified injury patterns in your database. Requesting immediate review and guidance on a current examination in progress." The response from the other end of the line caused Commander Hawkins to straighten in her chair, her expression shifting from professional concern to something approaching alarm. She began reading coordinates and reference numbers from Riley's medical file, information that Martinez recognized as patient identification data, but delivered with the precision typically reserved for military operations rather than healthcare administration. Meanwhile, Riley sat alone in the examination room, her hands resting calmly in her lap, despite the growing awareness that her carefully maintained anonymity was beginning to unravel. 8 years of quiet service had been built on the foundation of unremarkable medical examinations and routine administrative processing. The extended delay in completing today's appointment suggested that foundation was developing cracks that could expose everything she had worked to keep buried. The sound of rapid footsteps in the corridor outside drew her attention, followed by voices speaking in the clipped tones that indicated official business rather than casual conversation. Riley recognized the particular cadence of senior enlisted personnel coordinating with commissioned officers, the kind of inter-rank communication that occurred when situations required immediate action and clear chain of command execution. Her thoughts drifted briefly to dark memories that she had spent years learning to suppress. Images of smoke and debris that surfaced unbidden whenever medical attention became too focused or prolonged. The sterile environment of the examination room triggered associations with field hospitals and emergency treatment that belonged to a different life, a different identity that officially no longer existed. Commander Hawkins appeared in the doorway of the examination room, her professional demeanor unable to completely mask the tension that had developed during her secure telephone consultation. Behind her, Martinez carried a tablet loaded with additional documentation forms that suggested the examination process was expanding rather than concluding. "Petty Officer Trent, we need to extend your examination today to include some additional documentation and consultation with senior medical personnel," Commander Hawkins explained in the measured tone of someone delivering information that had been carefully scripted during security briefings. Riley nodded her understanding while studying the commander's face for clues about what had triggered this escalation. Military medical personnel were trained to maintain professional composure regardless of circumstances, but Commander Hawkins displayed the subtle stress indicators that suggested she was dealing with material that exceeded routine medical administration. "Is there a problem with my physical readiness status?" Riley asked, maintaining the same cooperative tone she had used throughout the morning despite her growing awareness that the situation was developing beyond anyone's control. "We are following standard protocols for thorough documentation," Commander Hawkins replied, without directly answering Riley's question. The evasion confirmed what Riley had already begun to suspect. Her scarring had been recognized by someone with access to classified medical databases, triggering security procedures that would bring increasingly senior attention to her case. The careful anonymity that had protected her for 8 years was being systematically dismantled by military bureaucracy and digital record-keeping systems that connected dots she had hoped would remain permanently separated. Through the examination room window, Riley observed an unusual level of activity in the medical facility parking area. Additional vehicles had arrived, including what appeared to be official staff cars rather than the typical mix of personal vehicles and military transportation that characterized routine medical operations. Security personnel had taken positions that suggested they were establishing perimeter control rather than conducting standard facility protection. The telephone in Commander Hawkins' office rang with the distinctive tone that indicated a call from high-level military command authority. Riley could hear portions of the conversation through the thin walls, fragments of military terminology and reference codes that painted a picture of rapidly escalating official interest in her case. "Admiral Hargrove is en route and will arrive within 15 minutes, Commander Hawkins announced after completing her call. The mention of flag officer involvement confirmed Riley's worst fears about the direction of the situation. Admirals did not personally respond to routine medical examinations unless those examinations had uncovered something significant enough to warrant the highest levels of military attention. Her carefully constructed new life was about to collide with the classified past she had worked so hard to leave behind. Martinez busied himself with additional documentation procedures while trying to process the implications of having a Navy admiral summoned to review his examination findings. His medical training had not prepared him for the possibility that routine scar documentation could trigger responses from the highest levels of military command authority. The afternoon had evolved from standard healthcare delivery into something that felt more like a military intelligence operation. The sound of helicopter rotors became audible in the distance, growing steadily louder as they approached the medical facility landing area. Riley closed her eyes briefly and prepared herself for the end of 8 years of anonymity and the beginning of whatever consequences would follow from her past finally catching up with her present. Admiral Jonathan Hargrove entered the examination room with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command authority, his service dress blue uniform bearing the weight of 34 years of naval leadership. His weathered face carried the particular gravity that developed among senior officers who had overseen too many memorial services and signed too many letters to grieving families. Commander Hawkins and Martinez stepped aside as he approached the examination table where Riley sat with the same quiet composure she had maintained throughout the morning. The Admiral's eyes immediately focused on the photographs displayed on Martinez's tablet, his expression shifting from professional interest to something approaching shock as he studied the scarring patterns documented during the examination. His hands, steady despite his 62 years, enlarged each image with the careful attention of someone comparing evidence against deeply embedded memory. "Petty Officer Trent," Admiral Hargrove said, his voice carrying a tremor that suggested emotional impact rather than physical weakness, "I need to examine these scars personally." Riley nodded her consent and once again raised her tank top to expose the constellation of circular marks that had triggered such unprecedented attention from the naval medical system. Admiral Hargrove leaned closer, his trained eye tracing the pattern of scarring with recognition that sent visible tension through his shoulders and jaw. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute as Admiral Hargrove processed what he was seeing, his mind working to reconcile impossible evidence with 8 years of accepted reality. His breathing became more deliberate as he moved around the examination table, studying the scarring from multiple angles while cross-referencing the patterns against memories that had haunted him since assuming command of naval special warfare operations. These scars match the forensic evidence from Black Echo, Admiral Hargrove finally said, his words carrying the weight of classified information that few people were cleared to hear. Riley's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly at the mention of the operation name, her eyes closing involuntarily as memories she had spent years suppressing forced their way back to the surface. The sterile medical environment dissolved around her, replaced by images of smoke and debris, the acrid smell of explosives, and the desperate sounds of wounded teammates calling for help that would never come. Commander Hawkins and Martinez exchanged glances that reflected their growing understanding that they were witnessing the intersection of current military operations with classified historical events that exceeded their security clearance levels. The routine medical examination had uncovered something significant enough to summon flag officer attention, but the specific details remained beyond their need to know. Black Echo was a classified reconnaissance mission in northern Afghanistan 8 years ago, Admiral Hargrove continued, his voice taking on the formal tone he used when briefing senior leadership on sensitive operations. Intelligence indicated a high-value target meeting in a compound near the Pakistani border. A 6-person team was inserted for surveillance and potential direct action. Riley's hands had formed fists at her sides as the Admiral's words brought back details she had worked desperately to forget. The mission briefing delivered in a secure facility at Bagram Air Base. The helicopter insertion under cover of darkness. The careful movement through rocky terrain toward their observation position. The growing sense that something was wrong with their intelligence package. The compound was a trap, Admiral Hargrove said, his words confirming Riley's worst memories. Explosive devices had been pre-positioned around the surveillance site. When the team moved into position, the entire area was detonated simultaneously. The Admiral paused, studying Riley's face as she relived the moment when her world exploded into chaos and violence. The force of the blast had thrown her behind a boulder formation that provided just enough protection to prevent immediate death, while her teammates were killed instantly by the coordinated detonation. She had spent 16 hours trapped in the debris field, listening to enemy forces searching for survivors while her own blood pooled beneath her. All 6 team members were presumed killed in action, Admiral Hargrove continued. Extensive search and recovery operations found remains and equipment consistent with total unit loss. Memorial services were conducted, medals were awarded posthumously, and families were notified of their sacrifice. Riley opened her eyes and looked directly at Admiral Hargrove, her voice steady despite the emotional impact of having her survival acknowledged for the first time in 8 years. I crawled out on the second night after the search teams left. Took me 4 days to reach friendly forces. The Admiral's expression reflected the difficulty of processing information that challenged 8 years of accepted reality and official military records. He had personally attended the memorial service for the Black Echo team, had delivered eulogies that honored their sacrifice, and had signed the orders that awarded them Bronze Stars with Valor for their final mission. You have been serving under your real name and social security number for 8 years while officially listed as killed in action, Admiral Hargrove said, working through the administrative implications of Riley's survival. I reported to the first Navy command I could reach after medical treatment, Riley explained. Told them I wanted to continue serving, but needed a support role instead of special operations. The paperwork got processed through normal channels without anyone connecting it to Black Echo casualties. The bureaucratic explanation highlighted one of the persistent challenges within large military organizations, where administrative systems often operated independently without cross-referencing classified operations databases. Riley's survival had fallen through gaps in the system that allowed her to rebuild her military career, while her official death remained unquestioned in special operations records. Admiral Hargrove sat heavily in the examination room chair, the weight of 8 years of Memorial Day speeches and medal presentations settling on his shoulders. He had honored Riley's sacrifice at ceremonies attended by families and senior military leadership, had used her story as an example of heroic service in briefings to congressional committees responsible for defense appropriations. Your teammates' families attended memorial services where I spoke about your courage and dedication, Admiral Hargrove said quietly. I have visited Arlington National Cemetery annually to pay respects at graves that include your name. Riley's response came without hesitation, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had spent years thinking about such implications. My teammates died as heroes serving their country. Their families deserve to remember them that way. My survival does not diminish their sacrifice or change what they gave for this mission. The examination room fell silent as everyone present processed the magnitude of what had been revealed. Riley had chosen 8 years of anonymity over recognition, had selected quiet support duty over the attention and benefits that would have accompanied her survival story becoming public knowledge. Her decision to serve without acknowledgement reflected an understanding of military culture and family dynamics that prioritized others' needs over her own recognition. Commander Hawkins and Martinez remained professional witnesses to a conversation that would require careful documentation and restricted dissemination through appropriate classified channels. They had stumbled upon a story that challenged official records and raised complex questions about military bureaucracy, survivor support, and the intersection of classified operations with routine administrative processing. Admiral Hargrove studied Riley's face, seeing for the first time the person behind 8 years of memorial ceremonies and official correspondence with bereaved families. Her quiet strength and deliberate choice of continued service over personal recognition revealed character traits that explained both her survival during Black Echo and her decision to rebuild rather than seek attention afterward. Admiral Hargrove rose slowly from his chair, the full weight of Riley's story settling into his consciousness as he processed 8 years of misunderstood reality. His movements carried the deliberate precision of someone preparing to execute a formal military protocol that had been long overdue, each gesture reflecting the gravity of acknowledging sacrifice that had gone unrecognized for nearly a decade. The examination room had become charged with an atmosphere that transcended routine medical procedures, transforming into something approaching a sacred space where truth intersected with honor and long-delayed recognition finally found its proper moment. Commander Hawkins and Martinez stood at attention without being ordered, their professional instincts recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary within the clinical confines of naval medicine. Petty Officer Riley Trent, Admiral Hargrove said, his voice taking on the formal tone reserved for the most solemn military ceremonies. On behalf of the United States Navy and the families of your fallen teammates, I want to acknowledge your extraordinary survival and your choice to continue serving with honor and dignity. Riley remained seated on the examination table, her hands resting calmly in her lap, despite the emotional magnitude of finally having her survival recognized by the military leadership that had memorialized her death. The moment carried weight that extended beyond personal validation, touching on themes of duty, sacrifice, and the complex relationships between individual recognition and collective memory. You survived conditions that killed 5 of your teammates, endured 16 hours trapped in a debris field while enemy forces searched for survivors, and then crawled 4 days through hostile territory to reach safety, Admiral Hargrove continued. Any one of those elements would constitute extraordinary heroism worthy of the highest military recognition. The Admiral's words painted a picture of survival that Riley had never allowed herself to frame in heroic terms, her own memory of those events clouded by survivor guilt and the overwhelming sense of loss that accompanied being the sole person to escape the Black Echo disaster. She had lived with those 4 days for 8 years as a source of pain rather than pride, focusing on what she had failed to prevent rather than what she had managed to accomplish. More significantly, Admiral Hargrove said, stepping closer to Riley with the formal bearing that preceded the most important military presentations, you chose to continue serving your country rather than seeking recognition or compensation for your sacrifice. You rebuilt your military career and support roles while allowing your teammates to be remembered as heroes. Riley's response reflected the same quiet strength that had characterized her interaction throughout the morning, her voice steady despite the emotional complexity of having her choices acknowledged and validated by flag officer authority. I wanted to honor their memory by continuing the work we all believed in. Recognition would not bring them back or change what happened during the mission. The humility in her answer highlighted character traits that Admiral Hargrove recognized as representative of the finest traditions of military service, the willingness to place mission and team above personal advancement, or glory. Her decision to serve anonymously while carrying the physical and emotional scars of combat represented dedication that exceeded standard expectations of duty and sacrifice. Commander Hawkins found herself moved by witnessing this intersection of personal heroism with institutional recognition, understanding that she was observing a moment that would reshape how the Navy processed the aftermath of classified operations and supported survivors who chose service over publicity. The medical examination had evolved into something that would require careful documentation and consideration at the highest levels of military leadership. Martinez struggled to reconcile the quiet logistics specialist he had been examining with the combat veteran whose survival story was unfolding before him. His understanding of military heroism had been shaped by dramatic narratives and public recognition ceremonies, not by the subtle courage required to serve anonymously while carrying the burden of being the sole survivor of a classified operation. Admiral Hargrove stepped back and rendered a formal military salute, his gesture carrying the weight of 8 years of delayed recognition and the accumulated respect of senior leadership finally acknowledging extraordinary service. The salute lasted longer than protocol typically required, reflecting both personal and institutional appreciation for sacrifice that had gone unrecognized due to administrative oversight and bureaucratic compartmentalization. Riley returned the salute from her seated position, her movement precise despite the unusual circumstances and emotional weight of the moment. The exchange represented more than military courtesy, serving as formal acknowledgement that her survival and continued service had been witnessed and valued by the leadership that bore responsibility for the mission that changed her life. The silence that followed their salute exchange carried profound weight, filling the examination room with unspoken understanding about the complexity of military service, the reality of classified operations, and the personal costs associated with duties that could never be fully shared with civilian society. Each person present understood they were participating in recognition that should have occurred 8 years earlier. Your choice to serve quietly while officially dead represents a level of dedication that challenges our understanding of military commitment, Admiral Hargrove said, his words reflecting both admiration and the institutional soul-searching that Riley's story would require. You have exemplified service above self in ways that exceed our highest examples of military virtue. Riley's acceptance of his praise came with characteristic understatement, her response reflecting the same practical approach that had guided her decision to continue serving rather than seeking attention or benefits associated with survival recognition. I had skills and training that could still contribute to military operations. It seemed wasteful to let personal trauma prevent continued service to something larger than myself. Her explanation revealed thinking that prioritized institutional needs over individual welfare, demonstrating the mindset that enabled her survival during Black Echo and sustained her through 8 years of anonymous service. The perspective reflected military training at its finest, producing individuals capable of functioning effectively regardless of personal cost or recognition. Admiral Hargrove recognized that Riley's story would require careful handling through appropriate military channels, balancing the need to honor her service with the operational security requirements that continued to surround Black Echo details. Her survival raised complex questions about casualty reporting, family notifications, and the intersection of classified operations with routine military administration. The medical team had become witnesses to military history, their routine examination revealing a story that would influence how the Navy approached survivor support and recognition procedures for classified operations. Riley's case highlighted gaps in administrative systems that allowed heroes to serve anonymously while official records maintained inaccurate information about their status. Commander Hawkins understood that documenting this discovery would require coordination with Personnel Security, Special Operations Command, and family assistance programs responsible for supporting relatives of Black Echo casualties. Riley's survival did not diminish her teammates' sacrifice, but it did complicate the administrative and emotional framework surrounding their memorial. Admiral Hargrove concluded his formal recognition by acknowledging the profound respect that Riley's choices had earned from military leadership, her decision to serve quietly representing ideals that military institutions aspired to instill but rarely witnessed in such pure form. Her story would become part of leadership training about duty, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service above self. Admiral Hargrove settled back into the examination room chair, his formal recognition of Riley's service complete, but the practical implications of her discovery requiring careful consideration and planning. The weight of 8 years of memorial ceremonies and family correspondence pressed against the reality of having a living hero whose survival challenged established narratives and official records. "Riley," he said, using her first name for the first time during their encounter, "you now face a choice that will fundamentally alter the course of your life. We can process your survival through official channels, update casualty records, and provide you with the recognition and benefits that your service has earned. Congressional Medal of Honor recommendations have been approved for less extraordinary circumstances than your survival and continued dedication." The prospect of public recognition carried implications that Riley had contemplated during sleepless nights over the past 8 years, understanding that revelation of her survival would inevitably bring media attention, speaking engagements, and the kind of celebrity status that military heroes sometimes acquired through circumstances beyond their control. She had watched other veterans navigate the complex transition from anonymous service to public recognition, observing both the opportunities and burdens that accompanied such visibility. Alternatively, Admiral Hargrove continued, "We can maintain your current status while ensuring that appropriate personnel are aware of your background and capabilities. Your survival remains classified. Your service continues as it has, but command structure gains access to your expertise and experience for situations that might benefit from your unique perspective." The second option appealed to Riley's instinctive preference for anonymity while addressing her concern that her survival story might overshadow the memory of her fallen teammates. Public recognition would inevitably lead to questions about why she had chosen 8 years of silence, potentially creating controversy that could diminish respect for the men who had died during Black Echo. Riley's response came after careful consideration, her words reflecting the same thoughtful approach that had guided her major decisions since crawling out of that Afghan debris field. "I would prefer to continue serving quietly while having my background properly documented for command awareness. Public recognition feels like it would dishonor my teammates who cannot speak for themselves." Admiral Hargrove nodded his understanding, recognizing that her choice reflected both personal preference and sophisticated understanding of military culture and media dynamics. Her decision demonstrated the same selfless thinking that had enabled her survival and sustained her through 8 years of anonymous service while carrying the burden of being sole witness to her unit's final moments. Your choice raises important questions about how we identify and support other survivors who might be serving anonymously after similar administrative oversights, Commander Hawkins observed, her medical perspective focusing on the systemic implications of Riley's case. The observation highlighted concerns that extended beyond Riley's individual situation, suggesting that bureaucratic gaps in casualty processing might have allowed other survivors to slip through administrative cracks and rebuild military careers without proper recognition or support. Her story could serve as catalyst for improved procedures that better connected classified operations databases with routine personnel management systems. Martinez had been processing the magnitude of conducting a routine medical examination that uncovered military history and revealed administrative failures spanning nearly a decade. His documentation of Riley's scarring patterns had triggered a chain of events that would influence military medicine, personnel security, and survivor support procedures at the highest levels of Navy leadership. "We will need to establish protocols for periodic consultation on matters where your operational experience could provide valuable insight," Admiral Hargrove explained to Riley. "Your perspective on survival techniques, enemy tactics, and the psychological aspects of isolation could benefit current special operations training and planning." Riley accepted the Admiral's proposal while maintaining her preference for assignments that contributed to military effectiveness without requiring public exposure or detailed explanations of her background. Her unique experience offered value to military operations while her continued anonymity preserved the dignity of her teammates' memory and avoided complications associated with celebrity status. The practical arrangements for updating Riley's records while maintaining operational security would require coordination between multiple military departments, each with different security requirements and administrative procedures. Her case would become a template for handling similar situations that might emerge as military database systems became more sophisticated and cross-referenced. Admiral Hargrove recognized that Riley's story would influence his own understanding of military service and the hidden costs of classified operations that rarely receive public attention or recognition. Her 8 years of quiet dedication, while carrying physical and emotional scars, represented service ideals that military institutions work to cultivate, but seldom witnessed in such pure form. There are probably people in your own lives who serve quietly in ways that make a real difference, but never receive recognition or attention for their contributions, Riley thought as she considered the broader implications of choosing anonymity over acknowledgement. Think about the teachers who stay late to help struggling students, the coworkers who take on extra responsibilities without seeking credit, or the family members who provide care and support without expecting praise. Have you ever taken time to recognize someone who makes your life better through their quiet dedication? Her reflection on unrecognized service resonated throughout the examination room, as everyone present considered their own experiences with people whose contributions went unacknowledged despite making significant differences in the lives of others. Military culture often celebrated dramatic heroism while overlooking the steady dedication that sustained operations and supported communities. Commander Hawkins began planning the medical documentation that would properly record Riley's combat history while maintaining appropriate security classifications, understanding that her case would influence how military medicine approached veterans whose service records did not fully reflect their experience and sacrifice. The intersection of routine healthcare with classified operations required protocols that balanced medical needs with security requirements. Martinez realized that his routine examination skills had uncovered one of the most significant military stories he would encounter during his career, transforming a standard annual physical into a moment of historical discovery that would be remembered long after his own service concluded. His attention to detail and willingness to pursue unusual findings had enabled recognition that was 8 years overdue. Admiral Hargrove prepared to coordinate Riley's case through appropriate military channels while ensuring that her preferences for continued anonymity were respected and protected. Her story would become part of leadership training about the true meaning of service, demonstrating that the highest forms of military dedication often occurred without recognition or public acknowledgement. Riley returned to the examination table one final time as Martinez completed the paperwork that would officially document her medical examination, while noting that additional consultation had been provided by senior medical and command personnel. Her annual physical would be recorded as complete. Her duty status would remain unchanged, but the military leadership now understood they had a genuine hero serving quietly in their ranks. As the examination room returned to its normal state of sterile medical efficiency, Riley prepared to walk back to the logistics office, where supply requisitions and inventory management awaited her attention. Her teammates would remain honored in their graves. Her survival would continue to serve the mission they had all believed in, and her choice to prioritize service over recognition would inspire military leadership to better recognize the quiet heroes who served alongside them every day.